Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. I'm going to be interviewing around a book that I strongly suggest that you obtain, and it's called The Autobiography of Black Male Violence, a personal critique of episodic male violence in America, and this book contains 2 volumes. And I have with me the author of the book, who has been my mentor. He was my professor at Northeastern Illinois University Center for Inner City Studies before it became the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. And he also has a lot of children, one of whom was my student, and that's the Reverend Julia Porter Maddox, who in fact is responsible for the cover design of this book. But Reverend Dr. Kwame John Porter is my guest today, and I'm happy to welcome him so that we can talk about this work that he's doing and the work that he is going to be putting out very soon. But right now we're going to talk about this particular book, which is one of the books that 2 volumes that Dr. Porter is now currently working with. Dr. Porter, I greet you. Hello, how are you?
Hotep, my sister, I greet you in the love of our people.
Well, I'm so glad. I want you to know that when I got this book, I had to take the time to read it because I didn't want to have you on the show until I knew what you had written. And you had, in a note you sent me with this book, you said, "You are an integral part of this book because you have been an important part of my life."
Yes, you have.
I cannot forget your teaching my class 40 years ago when I had to be absent, and I cannot forget your consistent and continuous commitment to the liberation of African people. In this sense, we consider you family. And Dr. Porter, that just makes me so proud that you said that. And I know that there are so many others. In fact, you have just an exhaustive list of other people whose lives you have touched and who have touched your lives.
Yes.
And Barbara Sizemore, who was also the late Dr. Barbara Sizemore, who was one of my teachers as well, the late Dr. Jacob H. Carruthers, who also was one of my teachers. And then, of course, you mentioned one of my favorite people, and that's Marion Stamps, the late Marion Stamps, who is just such a wonderful role model. And I want to put this out because I have been trying to find Guana, who was my student, or one of Marion Stamps' children, because I want to talk about her legacy on the show. So I hope somebody will see her and find her and have her to contact us so that we can do this. But I looked at your book is so highly recommended. You have all of these people who are writing wonderful things about your book, including Eugene Perkins, who himself is an author, a poet and a playwright and an author. And Lou Myers, you know, you have they not only them, but so many others who are writing these wonderful things about this book. You've dedicated this book to your mother.
Yes.
And you know, you talked about your mother's strength, and you talked about pretty much, I think, your initiation to violence. You talked about a very cruel stepfather who was very unkind to your mother. In fact, brutal and abusive. I would just have to say that to your mother. But she had the good sense to get out of the situation.
Oh, yeah.
Which is somewhat different from many women today. We have a lot of domestic violence today, because women do not know how to get out of abusive situations.
Well, you know, my mother had a saying back then. I remember as a child. She said, "Johnny, if someone keeps mistreating you, don't let that keep happening. Go so far away from them that they can never find you." And that's what she did.
And took you with her.
Me and my 2 sisters.
Right. So that you had an opportunity to thrive and to grow and to develop into the person that you are today. Talk about some of your journey. Talk about, you know, you were an ordained minister. You were a very significant part of the civil rights movement with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And you know, you have been a professor, and you now an author.
And part of the Black Power and Black Consciousness movement, too.
Right. Okay. Father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all of these things. How does one get from the mother who told you, stay away from abuse, to the man you are now? Can you tell me something about the high points and maybe some low points of your journey?
Yes. Well, let me start with a couple of high points. Again, my mother was instructive. A woman with a sixth grade education who was an awesome reader. She loved books and newspapers,
magazines. And she taught
magazines.
your father to read.
Taught him to read and write. He was illiterate. She tried to teach my first stepfather to read, but he turned her away.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I don't need none of that book learning. I make a good living with all that book stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So she couldn't help this rascal. But my mother taught me two other unforgettable principles before I was 10 years old. She had a saying. She would say, children, we may look like we poor. We don't have a lot of money, but we are rich in the Lord. Mm-hmm. And she said, y'all are rich. Mm-hmm. Y'all millionaires, mm-hmm. but you don't know it because you're rich in Jesus. Now, I tell you, Dr. Gloria, that stuck with me the rest of my life. The other principle she taught was that, son, you can be anything you want to be. In fact, you were marked before you came out of my womb. I prayed for God to give me a son. Out of the Bible, 1 Samuel, the first chapter, Hannah's prayer. She prayed to God to give her a son whose name was Samuel. And I prayed for God to give me a son, and you were that boy. So whatever you're supposed to do in life, you can't get away from it because you marked. Now that stuck with me, Dr. Gloria, the rest of my life. Those two principles.
So your mother had,
that's what's foundational.
Your mother had aspirations for you that she made you aware of and kept you aware of throughout your maturing years, throughout your growing up.
Yeah, and I used to ask her, I said, Mama, if you could have become what you wanted to be, what would you want to be? She said, Johnny, I always wanted to be a teacher and a professor. My God, that brought tears to my eyes as a young man.
So you fulfilled her dream.
In some sense, it looks like I fulfilled a part of her dream. In fact, I know when I graduated from college finally, after 3 years in the Army at Iowa Western College, my place in Iowa, I graduated in 1959. And my mother and one of my youngest sister and her children came up to graduation. And when I walked across that stage and it was over, and we were milling around out there, we hugged and everything, and looked in my mother and my sister's eyes, and they were both crying. My sister said, Johnny, you should have tied me up and made me stay in school. and my mother said, son, I knew you was going to make it. I knew you was going to make it. With tears, I knew you was going to make it. I'm proud of you. I've never forgotten those words, those statements. They are foundational, Dr. Gloria, in whatever I have become, and am still becoming. They were foundational.
Well,
that was my basic black value system right there.
Right.
Right there.
So it came from your mother, who was obviously a very strong role model in your life. And your wife.
Yes,
you know, you've got some black women that you can tell us about, because you are.
Oh my God.
Your wife is a wonderful woman.
Wonderful.
You've been married. Is it almost 50 years?
Almost this year. It'll be 50 years.
It'll be 50
December
years.
27th.
Okay.
50 years.
All right. So you've been married 50 years.
6 grown children.
6 grown children.
13 grandchildren.
13 grandchildren.
2 great-grandchildren.
2 great-grandchildren.
My God.
Your daughter, Julia, is a minister.
Yes. My son, John, who's with me, the oldest, is a businessman.
All right.
Resources Plus.
Okay.
My next son is a psychiatric social worker, Joseph. And then the third daughter, Jessica, is an administrator at the Lutheran School of Theology.
Mm-hmm.
And then my next daughter, Georgia, is in the development department at Chicago State University.
Mm-hmm.
And then my next daughter, Africa, is an entrepreneur, Africa Enterprises, and a founder of the Deborah movement.
Is that right?
Yeah, she's one of the founders of the Deborah movement.
Okay.
And is an awesome public speaker.
I'm not surprised that she's involved with that then.
Yes.
Because of yourself. Now you know that you've done all these wonderful things. There are pictures of you in this book where you were introducing Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yes, yes.
You know, and the pictures of discussion of your spending time in jail for
5 or 6 times.
For integrating white-only facilities. And so with all of that done, you know, you've raised a family, you've gotten numerous degrees, you have been active, you've been a pastor, you've pastored a church, you've done all of these things. You could rest on your laurels for the rest of your days. Why are you writing books?
Because I believe that before we leave this earth, this side, and go to the other side, I believe we ought to leave some concrete legacies. We ought to do what Amos Wilson talks about and done himself. We ought to leave some blueprints, some institutional blueprints by which people could follow. Or as Oscar Davis once said, when we leave here, we'll leave a map, a plan. So those coming after us will know on page 3 so-and-so, this is how we do this, this is how we do that. We ought to do that. I wanted to leave a living legacy, not just my memoirs, but I wanted to leave a pathway, a trail that people could concretely follow and could develop and build beyond what I did. And that's why I'm writing. Not just for my children, but other generations of others, particularly black children and youth.
Well, you know, now, when you say that you want to leave a legacy, I know Dr. Margaret Burroughs says the very same thing. In fact, she's written a poem, What Will Your Legacy Be?
Wonderful.
So I do understand the necessity to leave a legacy, but at the same time, you have all these choices because you once wrote a book on dating, the dating habits of
young black
Americans.
31 years ago.
And so now you have to explain to me how you go from the dating habits of young black Americans to the book that you now have on the autobiography of black male violence.
Well, the dating habits of young black Americans was inspired by 2 things. First, one of my nieces from Kansas City came to live with us in 1977 after high school. And I discovered as bright as she was, at 17, she didn't know a thing about really about men and dating. And some guy was sitting up in my living room when I came home, and I passed by them, and they didn't speak. He didn't speak. I came back. I said, well, no, you introduced me to this gentleman? She introduced me to him, and I talked to the guy a little bit, something like that. And after he left, I said, do you know anything about this guy? How old he is, whether he's married or single, whether he has any children, what his plans are? I mean, is he involved in anything black? Does he read even the Ebony magazine, the Jet? You know, where's his head at? And she hadn't thought about those things. So she spurred me to write the book. And then another thing happened. I had 3 of my youngest deceased sister's children who came to live with us in the early 70s, okay, after high school. And they were in their teens, mid-teens like that. And my children were a bit younger. And lo and behold, I discovered that all 3 of these young guys had been either sexually molested or something had happened to them, okay? Because they all had some pedophilism in them, okay? And my youngest son caught one of them, you know, trying to molest a couple of my daughters. He didn't succeed at it. And so, given that right in my own family, which was a shock to me, okay, at the time, I was inspired by both these incidents to write this book on dating habits, to set forth some principles of dating and sexuality for black people, for young black people.
And I think that was a timely book, as is this one. Now, explain why you decided to write on black male violence, and especially an autobiography, because your life has not been filled with violence. I mean, we all live in this society, and we all are subject and witness to the violence of this society. But there are so many things about which you could write, and you chose to write this, so I need to know
Well, don't
why.
forget, Dr. Gloria, I cut my teeth in the Inglewood community.
Okay, where your church was.
Yeah, and I came to Inglewood in 1960 as a student pastor for 2 years. So I was in Inglewood a total about 32 years off and on, okay? And I came to England in 60 precisely at the time where the group that's now called the Gangster Disciples, then they were called the Devil's Disciples, were in formation. And the El Rukins over the Blackstone Rangers were in formation in Woodlawn. I came precisely and where the Nation of Islam was growing by leaps and bounds, okay? I came, and this was a kind of pre-movement. The movement that occurred down south, sit-in, the Freedom Rise occurred around that same time. But up north and in cities like Chicago, you didn't have this movement. I mean, you had the Muslims growing, but I came right in the midst of a lot of episodic violence. I mean, every other day, somebody was getting shot around my church. And one day, a group of parents came to me and said, "Reverend Porter, we know you were able to talk to the gang leaders, because their sons were being intimidated because the gangs were recruiting." And I sat down with a couple of gang leaders who I had their respect, and they shot pool in my church. They played ping pong there occasionally. And I could talk to them face to face. I sit down, I won't call their name over there. I sit down with them. I said, "Listen, can you stop your guys from shooting at the young men who live around here, and many who go to my church?" I said, "It's not right. And you can do it. You got the power to do that." And the main gang leader told me, "Reverend Porter, got my word. It's going to stop." And indeed, it did. It slowed down drastically. But a lot of those boys who were being threatened, while they were not some of them were not members of our church, a lot of them joined the church at that time. I'm not sure they joined. I'm not sure they joined because of Jesus Christ or faith, or because of fear. It was a safe haven. But given the episodic violence that was occurring around there, and then the violence in the South, my God, that was occurring through the demonstrations and all that, and the Klan and all that business. Then I went to Albany in '62 and joined Dr. King in SCLC's, the Southern Christian Youth Group's first mass nonviolent demonstration in Albany, Georgia. And when I came back, I really went to start organizing a nonviolent chapter of Dr. King's organization, which I did in '64, which is Dr. King's first foray into Chicago, 2 or 3 years before '66. And because of the episodic violence that was occurring all around me and throughout the nation, I remembered anecdotes. I remembered things that had happened. Then I went back to my childhood and looked at episodes of violence there, growing up. And in Kansas City, Kansas, where I was raised from 1940 to 1954. I remember space of violence there. I remember being shot at a party, okay? Being mistaken for another gang rival. Like we weren't in a gang, my little group, but these guys were after people and broke the party up and started shooting everybody. And I remember another party was a guy got stomped to death. My God, I heard his skull crush, you know? Oh my God. So I remember some episodes of violence. I remember some guys pull a train on a woman, a drunk woman.
Right, and try to get you involved in it.
Yeah, and told me,
but you refused.
I refused. And the guys I grew up with, and they told me, you ever say anything about this, going to find you in the Missouri River. And I looked at them and I said, man, I ain't saying nothing to me, because I knew these guys, and they would surely kill me. So I grew up in the midst of that. Then when I was in grade school and junior high school, I got beat up by 2 schoolboy bullies.
Right.
And had to pay them a quarter a week.
Pay
quarter
protection.
A week. Protection money. You know what I mean? And when I couldn't pay, I got my nose blood, my eye blacked, until I started fighting back. And then I had to get with another group and help organize me a gang. to stand against them. And once that's kind of how gangs started. You had to get together. One gang leader told me a few years ago. I said, "Man, how do all these guns get in? How do you guys get involved in shooting at each other?"
Because they couldn't win in a fist fight.
Right. I said, "Man, we used to fight with chains, and we used to fight with everything but knives and guns, and clubs and bats, and everything. Best of them, even boxing gloves." He said, "But then some guys got tired of getting their butt beat." He said, "Butt, you know, butt beat." So they went and got them a gun. When they were looking, they done shot somebody. So everybody had to go get a gun then to protect them, get what they call an equalizer. Guys, I remember when I was young, 16, 17, guys told me, "Man, you got an equalizer? Don't go that part if you ain't got no equalizer." Now I found out the equalizer meant having a gun. Somebody got to carry a gun, man. Because, you know, these come 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, man, the party about over. These drunk cats, man, they're going to have smack on somebody's shoes or dance somebody's girl, man, and smack on her, and these cats going to bust it up and start shooting. So I grew up with some of that, babe. I grew up in the midst of a lot of that.
Okay.
And so I reflected back and then look at the growth of violence. You know, despite the power of nonviolence having helped change the country in the 60s, the growth of violence, a lot of it due to economic desperation, poverty, and due to emotional, mental, and I argue with Carl Bell that violence is a health problem. Indeed, partly a mental health problem too. And so that, but nothing was being done about it. And then the prisons help to multiply violence. Guys go in prison, they come out working within. I mean, they pick up all kinds of bad habits, you know, plus STD and, you know what I mean, sexual aberration and perversion. So I mean, so I witnessed up close, doctor, all kinds of violence and saw it. As I mentioned, the pedophilism of three of my nephews. So I saw it up close. Something can happen to these young brothers. You know, they need to be detoxed of violence. But nobody was detoxing them of violence. Nobody had a 7-point program like Carl Bell has now, and some other people have, you know, to deal with the sickness.
Well, you know, you say violence is not in our genes, and we are not born with a proclivity for violence.
Nope.
So whence cometh this violent behavior that we are now witnessing?
I argue that hundreds of thousands of movies, macho movies, from Shane to High Noon to the Terminator, you know, to Monster, to you name it, New Jack City, you know what I mean? Hundreds of thousands of movies where the bad guys and the good guys and the in-between guys get into it, and the bad guy gets him a group, he controls the territory of drugs and women, and the pimp image, you know, what looks like you're getting over and living a good life forever, and looks like you're never going to die. People get shot, and then a month later they come back in another movie. So death becomes unreal. In one sense, violence becomes unreal to young people who don't realize that once you're dead, you're dead, and that the life is precious and sacred. But there are young people who've been mangled and tangled and have been neglected. I mean, you think of just recently, the young woman, the twins, left in a hot room upstairs and died. And she was somewhere at a store. And the room was full of filth and dirty diapers and feces and mice and roaches. I mean, hey, so we've got some young people who are having babies but are not mature and capable of raising them. And some of these youngsters grow up with that anger, with that frustration, with that hatred, that self and hatred and contempt, which spills over onto other people. The 2 young men riding by on a bicycle last week who shot the 2 little girls, killed one, wounded one. When they caught the one guy and they asked him, "Did you know this is wrong? Why'd you do it?" He said, "I don't care. I'll do it again," or something like that. I mean, there's a generation here, a part of a generation, that is literally driven out of their mind. Genocidal, nihilistic, necrophitic, that has a death wish. That death has little meaning to them. They go to funerals and don't even cry, show no emotion. So we're raising a generation that has been anesthetized against evil and violence and immune to it, and it's recreational for them. So we've got, and it's black and white, not just black young men, white young men, Hispanic young men, and even a lot of women now, basically doing crazy things of all races. So this violence has gotten out of hand. So I had to address its episodic culture. It's evil. Violence is a product of evil. It came out of something evil, something horrific, something demonic, something third, something unimaginable in terms of destructiveness. And so that it had to be addressed. And several books have come out in the last 15, 20 years dealing with this same topic. In fact, more books have come out in the last 30 years dealing with violence and relationships than most of the 20th century.
You know, you have 4 types of violence in your book, and I need some help with the first 2 because I'm not able to distinguish. I wasn't able to really differentiate as well as I wanted to between random violence and anonymous violence, because I see them as one and the same. A random violent act is usually done by an anonymous person. You know, they don't know you, you don't know them. So I'm trying to understand random violence.
Well, there's a subtle difference here.
And anonymous violence.
Subtle violence. Subtle difference here. In random violence, my study and research experience, along with others, shows that in random violence, someone or someones decide that they are going to drive around and the first crowd they see, and of course guys are probably usually high, they're going to just shoot at anybody in the crowd, and don't let them see somebody they believe belongs to a rival faction, a rival group. And so they shoot in the crowd in a random way, and oftentimes they are the ones doing the shooting, the perpetrators are very, very visible. They don't hide them. They're very visible. You see them. The 2 boys on the bike, those are random violence. They just shot not knowing the girl. People saw them on the bike. That happens a lot. Now, anonymous violence is the perpetrators try to remain as anonymous as possible, doctor. In other words, they do the dirty act, but they don't, nobody sees them, or very people see them, and a lot of that's done in the evening or at night, or where nobody sees them or can't identify them. The random acts, oftentimes, they don't want to be seen either, but they don't mind being seen. That is not their problem. They playing Godfather. They don't care. But the anonymous violence, the anonymous one wants to remain incognito, hidden in the shadows, in the dark.
And do they have then a target? They want to do this, they want to commit this act of violence, but against a particular target, but they don't want to be known.
That's the other distinction.
That's the distinction.
The anonymous violent personality often has a target in mind.
Okay.
A very specific target.
Okay.
The random violence don't have any target in mind.
Right.
They drive around.
A violent act.
Hey, there's a bunch on the corner over there. I mean, roll around again. Roll around again. Let's pop them. I mean, the anonymous violent personality normally does not want anybody to know that he or she did it. In fact, some of them may do an act of violence and hide the gun someplace and come back and get in the crowd. You know what I mean? The police come and they're in the crowd. And people, he was in the crowd. In the crowd, and maybe knowing what person in the crowd, they didn't see this person do it when he did it. That's a distinction. It's a fine distinction.
And
there's a kinship there, of course.
And revenge violence.
These are people who either somebody has done something to them or to their family or relatives or to their homies, or they imagine that the person they see has done it, or their friend or homie is related to them, has done it. So they seek revenge. They're seething. They may go for months and for years planning revenge. Say somebody killed somebody, and they go to jail. They're in jail for 10 years. And they get out of jail, but the relatives and some of the relatives and some of the friends have not forgotten. They look for a moment to get revenge for what that person did. And they make no moments about it. If they get caught with police, they tell them, yeah, I finally caught up with that so-and-so. I mean, well, no, killed my brother.
I think some of these acts of violence against children, in some cases, have been retaliatory against something that an adult has done,
Yes,
and they
yes.
have punished another family member for some dispute between them and another adult.
Now that may be the case. The two little girls were shot jumping rope. Simply, they may have been related to somebody that these boys either knew or think they knew was involved in an altercation someplace else.
It's interesting how sometimes you will hear the report that it was a case of mistaken identity, but I wonder, how does anybody know it's a case of mistaken identity if they don't know who the perpetrator was? Because if the perpetrator is anonymous, you don't know whether they intended to kill the person
Well,
they
you know,
killed
there's
or
a no
not.
snitch rule in the hood, no snitching.
Right.
But a lot of young people know who the perpetrators are, but they're afraid to tell on them. Because on the great underground grapevine, it is known that if you tell, snitch, and we find out you tell, you next. They be having your funeral next week. And that's strong. And the police don't have any antidote for that. Church doesn't have any antidote for that. Kids are scared. I ain't out there and get shot. These people will kill you, you know what I mean?
And enforcer violence.
These are no, these are people who are either kind of like bodyguards of some gangsters or thugs or people, and their job is to enforce the rules of the group. And their job is to strong arm if necessary, break a finger, break a leg, hurt, maim, kill somebody. And they're hard because they are among the toughest individuals in a group or in a gang. And their job is to enforce the code of the street, or the street law. For example, in the street law, you owe somebody some money, a debt, or you're paying, for protection or whatever, or you're paying to be able to do business on this spot here and there, and you fail to do it, pay your debt. Well, the enforcer goes to visit you to collect. Because normally first he or she's going to ask that you pay up. That you don't pay and you pay part, or I'm told you try to escape or make excuse. The enforcer may beat you half to death, or break a limb, or even kill you. Enforce the rules and the code of the street, the code of the group.
Well, you know, you have something in here, you quoting somebody who talks about negative violence and positive violence. I had a lot of trouble with that, Reverend Porter, because I just could not see violence as being positive in any way. But
well, let me give you an example.
okay.
There's a book which is considered the Bible on violence. It's a 1,000-page book published about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, Violence in America by Gurr and Durham. Violence in America. And in there, they do a historical analysis of historical violence in America and in the world, particularly in America. And they give examples of the violence which occurred at Harper's Ferry, John Brown. The violence occurred with Nat Turner slave revolts. A violence that was necessitated just to survive. They give examples of the Civil War being a just war, the necessity to fight that war to break the hold that slavery had over African people, our people. They give examples of World War II, that Hitler's violence was so horrible, despite the fact that America was rigidly segregated at the time. Hitler would have done much worse had he got loose in the world on America, because black people would have been the next group that he would have decimated if he could. And the belief that the violence, we had to fight a violent war to put Hitler down. And so that type of violence is seen as positive. A man keeps beating a woman all the time. She catches him in a vulnerable situation, stabs him to death, or scalds him with hot water. That sort of violence, though ugly and though wicked, was necessitated by her being literally a slave under this man. To break free, she had to hurt him or kill him, and so forth and so on. It's that sort of thing looked at least in this book by these two authors.
And I'm looking here too at that, and they're saying positive violence would include police coercion.
Well, I'm quoting them there now.
I know that. I'm saying it.
I
I'm
don't agree with
saying
all
you're
that.
quoting. No. I'm just saying, you know. But then they consider urban rioting, which was the rebellions that that people
That's a white
participated
perspective.
in as a result of the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther
But you
King.
see how I dealt with that, right?
I know that, but
I make a separation between the rioting and
you
rebellion.
did. You
What
can't.
they call rioting,
Right, you
in
called
front
it
of
urban
rebellion
rebellions,
or
right?
revolting.
But I'm just saying, you know, depending upon the author, you know, you will get these different
Shades of meaning.
perspectives
Right.
on violence. But I just thought you used some language that was a little bit soft here when you said many scholars estimate that the violence during the African slave trade may have been the most degrading in history. Degrading was too soft, Reverend Dr. Porter. Violence, the slave trade, I've been, you know, I've read.
You reading there?
I'm reading
Read
this.
a little further. Read another
Okay.
line or two, okay?
More than 75 million Africans are believed to have been killed, and sometimes that number is taken upwards to 300 million. I'm putting that in. That's my own words. But more than 75 million Africans are believed to have been killed or died during the transatlantic slave trade between the 16th and 19th centuries. That's a note. And then you say, unlike in previous forms of slavery, which were violent toward those captors, Africans were defined by Europeans as subhuman, which of course is another act of violence. But you know, many scholars have said that it is the slave experience that has engendered the self-hate that black people express even today, and that is at the bottom of so much aggressive and violent behavior. So that
That's
you
one
know,
theory,
so that if you're looking at violence, you know, the slave trade as a violent act, then its repercussions are still being felt.
It's post-traumatic slave syndrome, obviously.
Well, you know, I always argue about the post part because I say it's not post because it's not over.
It's active.
Yeah, it's still active.
Very much so.
But I just felt like I wanted you to not call it just degrading, because degrading is not forceful enough for the terrorist terrorism that was visited upon Africans during the entire course of the Atlantic slave trade, as well as the chattel slavery, as well as what still happens today. You know, the fact that we have little, if any, control over our destiny.
Now, by degrading, of course, I mean that it sought and indeed did reduce many blacks to a level of a level of obedience to the slave master and slave system, where many became like Sambos.
Well, you actually call it subhuman. You say Africans were defined by Europeans as subhuman. So it was you, and then you actually use the word that I liked better, and that was the word that you use in the very next paragraph is dehumanization.
Yes, yes.
So that it was the violence during the African slave trade was dehumanizing.
Indeed it was.
And so when you humanize a people, when you take away, when you deprive them of their vision of themselves as human beings and reduce them to chattel, to property, so that they see themselves as nothing more than some kind of commodity for the use of their oppressors, for their captors, then you have actually destroyed their personhood. You have actually transformed them from the human community into some inanimate object that can be dealt with any way that you want to, which violently or otherwise.
You know, there's a saying that by psychologists, psychiatrists, that you cannot degrade another human being without degrading yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that the whites who degraded black people degraded themselves too. Something happened to their souls and their spirits and their mental and moral sensibilities. I mean, they just didn't escape without being scarred. Some would say that they experienced a loss of soul, some blacks used to say. The loss of deep human capacity and compassion for life, certainly for the sacredness of human life, all life. That has to be considered.
Right, but I think about the slave experience because, as I mentioned before, Kiara Cheatwood said we have never fully understood slavery.
Mm-hmm.
The slave experience, the sickness caused in the soul by the slave experience, the slave experience engenders mental illness, and one can easily see how that can be, because if you don't read it in history books, you can read it in novels. When Toni Morrison wrote Beloved,
yes,
she went to Brazil, where slavery, where they did not sanitize the slave trade, where they actually still had the artifacts that you could see. And when you go to Gorée Island, which is in Africa, in Dakar, you actually can visit the places where the captives were pinned in.
At Dakar, Senegal?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Dakar, Senegal. You can actually visit the places where the captives were pinned in. And and Dr. Porter, when you walk into that space, an eerie feeling.
In the slave castles?
This was just a slave market. There was not a castle. We went to a castle in Ghana, but in this particular case, this was just a slave market with living quarters above it. And when you walk into that area, you feel an eerie feeling. You feel the presence.
I've heard that.
And when you look at that little narrow door, which is called the door of no return, where the people are taken out to those ships never to return home again.
My God.
And when you understand what the significance of home to an African, home was the way they punished the people who got out of harmony when in the African community was to excommunicate them and send them away from home. That was a punishment.
My God.
To be sent away from home. And you would have to, they didn't put you in jail. They didn't even have a word for jail. They didn't lock you up in jail. They made you leave. And people just, they grieved so much because to be sent away from home. Home was so very, very vital to the existence of an African. And so here you have a situation where the men are in one pen, the women are in another, the children are in yet another, and the women's screams can be heard all during the night when they are being raped by the soldiers and the other slave traders who
Pirates,
are holding them, holding them captive.
Mercenaries.
So that kind of terrorism, that kind of abuse, that kind of violence against people, to uproot them, to steal them away from their own people. An African had no identity as an individual. His identity existed in relationship to his kinship group.
Oh, yeah.
Without his kinship group, who is he? He is not a person. He is a person in relation. He is somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's sister, somebody's brother. What identity is this that you are not, you cannot be called by those names? Your name, Kwame, which I guess means Saturday born.
Yes.
What country is that from?
Ghana, mostly.
It's from Ghana. Did you take that because you traced some ancestry back to Ghana?
No, some Africans gave me this name more than 4 years ago.
But you use that name.
Oh, yeah.
Because you know the importance of the connection to family.
Yeah, they said I looked
Family
like I came
ties.
from one of the kinship groups there.
So family ties, if anybody knows family ties,
Yeah.
it is you. Look at yours.
Yeah.
50 years married, all of these, 6 children. How many grandchildren again?
13.
13 grandchildren again. So your family is important to you.
Oh,
You
yes.
could not conceive of yourself as not being in that family. You could not conceive of
Nope.
yourself as leaving that family and going somewhere off to pursue anything.
The insanity.
Absolutely. But you see the point that I'm trying to
Yes,
make.
I do.
That you would have to lose your mind
Yes.
if suddenly you were divested of everything that gave you personhood.
Yes, so true.
Your name is changed. You go from Kunta Kinte to Toby.
Yes.
You lose your kinship group, your history, your
Yeah.
land, your language, your culture.
Now that's violence.
That
the
is
worst sort.
truly violence.
Truly
and that
violent.
happened at least 75 million to 300 million times,
My God.
not counting the children that would have been born of those people who perished in the slave trade.
Yes, yes.
So this violence,
That is true violence.
that's true violence.
My God.
And,
true evil.
and so we are suffering still. It's not post. We are suffering still from the slave
Continuing,
experience. You know, because I think we have cultural DNA. I think we have cultural genes. I think we carry the memory
Yes.
of that experience in ourselves, in our own vessels, in our own viscera.
And the nature of our being.
Right, right. And so then to you know, the chattel slavery, if any novel that you read about, if you read Derek Bell's Faces at the Bottom of the Well, if you read any narrative, slave narrative, you keep listening to you keep hearing these stories of the brutality of how a mother's child could be taken from her on the whim of the slave master.
Snatched from her.
Snatched from her breast.
Yes.
Sold away. We don't, you know, we can't even fathom. We don't even have the mindset to fathom real violence.
Yes. Yes. Some of this wanderlust in our people, some of this looseness, some of this where men very easily walk away from their wife or girlfriend and children.
It's unnatural.
It's unnatural. And walk away and don't look back and don't seemingly care and seemingly unaffected. But they are affected.
Of course.
They are affected at a level so deep that it's almost unfathomable.
But see,
in terms of personality distortions.
And Reverend Porter, see, to know who we were, to look back and know who we were and see who we are becoming makes us aware of the aberrations.
Yes.
See, we know this is un-African. We know that an African father is never going to abandon his family.
Nope.
We know that an African mother is never going to neglect her children.
Nope.
We know that we have layers in the family. I mean, you have the grandparents and the great-grandparents. We have layers of people all caring as it takes a village to raise a child. The whole village cares for these children.
It would be tantamount to not existing at all.
Absolutely. So now look at the aberrations in our behavior subsequent to the slave experience. We are not behaving like people who ever had
So,
the history
so a lot
that
of
we
this
had.
shooting, gun violence, and gun homicidal violence is due to this unconscious aberration that has dogged us and trailed us all the way from 1619 down to today.
We don't know who we are, and we don't know who others are. We do not. We are individuals.
Yes.
What Jomo Kenyatta in Facing Mount Kenya said, individualism is an evil thing.
Yeah.
They consider that an evil concept because anytime you can separate yourself from the kinship group, then you have no responsibility to it. It has no authority over you. And there must be an authority. When a man is beating his wife, there should be, in the African community, if there's conflict between a man and a wife, there are elders in the village.
Yes.
And the elders take up that problem. You know, you may not mistreat your wife, you know, and they handle that. But we don't have respect for elders in our village. You know, elders are old people who are more of a burden than they are an asset.
High maintenance. Yes.
And so we find all these nursing homes sprouting up. You're from the South. I'm from the South.
Oh, yeah.
Nursing homes? There were no nursing homes when I was growing up.
Same here. Nope, nope, nope.
Nobody's ever going to put
took care of each other.
An elderly relative. Because why? Because this person is a part of you, and you are a part of that person, and you can't see yourself as a separate entity.
Yes.
You know, how can you put your mother somewhere for strangers to neglect?
It's like putting yourself somewhere.
Absolutely. How can you put your children in? You know, children are being taken from out of homes. They say it's for the welfare of the children. But we're losing a lot of children to the Department of Children and Family Services. You know, we have a lot of children who are fostered children. I'm told
over
that
10,000.
There are some schools where the whole school is comprised of foster children, which means when you send for parents to come up to school,
there are no parents.
The parents are not coming. If the foster parents don't come, nobody, the children do not feel love.
No.
The village does not love its children.
And when children do not feel love, they grow up with a lot of self-contempt.
Right.
Self-hatred.
Right.
And violent proclivity.
Right.
A tendency to do violence, to get that violence off of them onto somebody else.
Right. Because they're angry.
So they're angry and they're mad at everything.
There's a young man whose name I'm not remembering at the time, but I'm going to remember his book and tell his name later. But I've had him on the show. He wrote a book called Why Our Children Hate Us. And I didn't want him to have that title, and I told him so. I said, I don't like this title. But of course, when I read the book, I had to agree that if our children didn't hate us, they certainly had good reason, because he just made the case. He just talked about the neglect of the children and the ways in which we ignore their true needs while we give them substitutes for what they really need. It is, I don't have to guess. I know perfectly well when you have a large family, because I had a large family as well, you cook meals at home.
Yes.
You're not in restaurants eating. My mother used to say, my mother used to tell me that she felt sorry for children whose mothers had to be away from home working, and they had to go to the restaurant to have a hamburger, you know, after school. That was just a pitiful thing. Now it's some sort of treat for you to go away from home and have some kind of fast food. But we cooked meals. And we cooked them from scratch, and we had dinner time, and we ate together, and we found out how we were doing.
We certainly won't eat together every Sunday. Dinner together, families.
And you need to sit down with each other so you can find out how each other is doing.
Yes.
You need to, because
and
sometimes people don't tell you.
What the needs are.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And don't ask anybody
and
how
we
they
can
are
help each other.
Unless you want to know, and unless you want to help them with whatever they're going to tell you their problems are. But the whole idea to be uprooted from your kinship group and to be kept in a constant state of instability. You could never form a family because your family could be disrupted at the drop of a hat.
Yes, yes, yes.
So here we are in the midst of all this violence that is residual, that is a fallout from the slave experience. If we don't get some black history into the minds and hearts of our children so they can know, so we can know how far we've fallen.
Yes.
We've
That's
got to
what
know.
I'm saying in this book, too.
Right, right. That's exactly right. And I'm glad that you opened this up by saying that your mother said, if we don't get out of here, this man is going to kill us.
That's right.
Because we got music that says, Mama, he treats your daughter mean. Mama, he treats me badly.
Ruth Brown.
Makes me love him madly.
Ruth Brown.
What kind of insanity is this?
That's insane.
That somebody is treating you badly and making you love them madly. But this is how we are in relationship to oppression. We are being treated badly, and we are loving madly our oppressors.
Man, in 1952, we used to party off that record by Ruth Brown. Mama,
Right,
he treats your
right.
daughter
Yeah, but
meanest man I ever seen.
right.
I hear you.
It's not sane. It's
My
not
God.
sane
No,
to
it's
love
not.
someone who abuses you.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not sane to write lyrics to a song and have young people dancing, because you internalize that.
That's right.
See, young women have internalized that. That's why.
Expecting to be abused.
Absolutely.
That
You
a man
know?
ain't a man until he slaps you around.
Right,
beats
right,
the hell out of you.
right. Ain't
That's a
nobody's
real man.
business if I do, Billie Holiday used to sing.
Yeah.
You see, but we need to understand that some of these corrupting things that are coming into our community and coming into our midst
It's a deep pathology.
are exactly pathological.
Yes.
Are pathological, and they're contributing. And that is something we can do. You say united. That's what I love.
Yes.
United, we can stop this.
Yes, yes.
But of course, unity is the subject of, that's the theme song of this show, is the subject of this show. And so achieving unity among people who are broken and crippled
Yes.
and miseducated and
Alienated.
whatever, a bunch of stuff,
Yes.
is not
Broken.
an easy task. But of
Yes,
course,
yes.
you on the case.
Yes.
Yeah, you're busy writing. You got another book coming up?
Yeah, I've got a book coming out in September, a sequel to this book entitled An Autobiography of Black Male Violence Study Guide.
Okay.
Resources for men and boys who are tired of being destroyed by miseducation, drugs and violence, idleness, and joblessness.
So you're going to put the solution in the hands of the victim.
Yes.
Instead of trying to get other people to come in, you're
Yeah.
going to empower the
Empower
victim
the victims,
to take care of this.
Support the victims of violence. Yes.
You have a
definitely.
website,
Yes. website is the Porter Factor at
well, what's this?
yahoo.com.
PorterOnViolence.com.
That's my website. That's my website.
Okay,
That's my website.
www.porteronviolence.com. And what's the other one?
And my email.
Your
is,
email.
Email is the Porter Factor.
The Porter Factor.
at yahoo.com.
At yahoo.com.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you're going to get a great response to this book, because you have started the conversation, Reverend Porter.
Well, thank you.
And I'm
Gloria.
sure that there ought to be, once you get your study